Now, Madam Attorney General, I have like 25 seconds left. So because I'm curious, and I'd like to see you flip to the Jared Moskowitz section of the binder. I'm interested to see what staff provided on the oppo on me, and because we're in the Olympics, I'm going to give it a grade. I just want to see how good it is. So give me your best one.
So first of all, nothing is funny about mocking the Bible and holding up a Trump Bible. That's what you did. You made a joke, and I find offense to that. That's all I have to say.
I want it from the burn book.
Shame.
I want it from the burn book, which is the best one. What you got?
Has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Tonight, the United States Department of Justice is facing accusations of a betrayal so serious, some are calling it bigger than water. At the center of the controversy, a sitting Attorney General who refused to explain why the names of child trafficking victims were made public, while the identities of alleged powerful co-conspirators remained hidden behind redactions. In a tense and high-stakes congressional hearing, the nation's top law enforcement official was pressed for answers. But instead of clarity, critics say they saw deflection with sharp exchanges, personal remarks, and questions left unanswered. This isn't just politics. It raises broader concerns about transparency, accountability, and how sensitive cases are handled at the highest levels. The issue is tied to long-standing demands for openness surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein case, a case that continues to draw scrutiny years later. Supporters of greater disclosure point to documents and testimony, arguing that survivors are still waiting for the full truth to come out. Others emphasize the legal complexities involved in handling sensitive information, including privacy protections and ongoing investigations. What's clear is this: the debate is far from over. For many, the question remains, will there ever be full transparency? Let's take a look at the clip.
Several UCs as receipts. I'd like to have unanimous consent to introduce the National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, dated September 25th, 25.
Without objection.
The Bondi Department of Justice memo dated December 4th, 2025.
Without objection.
An article from Newsweek entitled DOJ Deletes Study Alleging Rise in Far-Right Terrorism, dated September 18th, 2025.
Without objection.
Notice article from October 3rd, 2025, Trump's directive on organized political violence could lead to increased surveillance of his critics.
Without objection.
Washington Post article, September 25th, 2025, Trump targets domestic terrorists, but only mentions the radical left.
Without objection.
Idaho Capital Sun, October 18th, 2025, rest easy, Idahoans, the No King demonstrators are American patriots.
Without objection.
Attacks on freedom of speech, what nonprofits need to know, published by the National Council of Nonprofits, the largest network of nonprofits in America.
Without objection.
The Freedom from Religious Foundation warns that Bondi memo weaponizes federal law enforcement against non-Christians and dissenting viewpoints.
Without objection.
A Ken Klipperstein blog from January 28th, 26, ICE's secret watch lists of Americans.
Attorney General Pam Bondi is now facing serious criticism, with accusations that her statements may be misleading both the American public and Congress. Her central argument has been clear, that the Department of Justice is fully complying with the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and that any gaps in released documents are simply technical or procedural issues. She has also stated that there is no credible evidence pointing to additional co-conspirators, while insisting her department is working to protect victims and survivors. But critics strongly dispute those claims. They argue the inconsistencies go far beyond minor errors, raising deeper questions about what has been withheld and why. Some voices have gone as far as to call the explanation deeply misleading, fueling demands for greater transparency and accountability. The controversy continues to grow. Let's take a look at the clip.
Objection.
And an Intercept article from February 2nd, 26, Trump calls his enemies terrorists. Does that mean he can kill them?
Without objection, the gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Attorney General Bondi.
Good afternoon.
Oh, you're right. Good afternoon. It's been a long day. I wrote this morning. We've known each other a long time, and I'll always be appreciative for your assistance when you were Attorney General in Florida after the shooting at my high school at Marjory Stoneman Douglas in my hometown of Parkland when we passed a bipartisan bill, the Marjory Stoneman Douglas School Safety Act, which was the largest policy response to a school shooting in American history. Your department also prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law a constituent of mine and former felon that had plans to kill me when he was picked up by law enforcement after he was target practicing in his backyard with 2 rifles, a scope, a silencer, 3,000 rounds of ammunition, an anti-Semitic manifesto. My name was the only name on their target list, and my kids found out about this from their friends at school. So thank you.
During her testimony before the House Judiciary Committee, Attorney General Pam Bondi made a series of claims that are now being heavily challenged. She stated that her office has been fully transparent and that if any credible evidence existed of individuals trafficking victims, charges would have been filed immediately. She also described the redaction of a high-profile name as a single, isolated mistake, one she said was corrected within minutes. But critics argue the facts tell a different story. According to lawmakers who reviewed the underlying materials, as well as the department's own document releases, those explanations don't fully align with the evidence. The issue was brought into sharp focus during the hearing by Representative Thomas Massie. Massie presented what he described as key exhibits, a roadmap, he argued, of where the department failed to meet transparency standards. One of the most serious examples involved an email from attorneys representing victims connected to Jeffrey Epstein. In that email, lawyers explicitly requested that certain names be kept private to protect victims' identities. However, when the department released documents, that same email was made public without fully protecting those names. Critics say the result was deeply troubling, with some victims reportedly exposed, while other parts of the document were selectively redacted. They argue this shows the document was actively reviewed, raising questions about how and why certain decisions were made regarding what to hide and what to reveal. The controversy has only intensified calls for accountability. Let's take a look at the clip.
However, the most transparent administration in American history. Before Trump, we didn't know the word transparency, apparently. It's been 12 months since you gave Republican influencers part one of the Epstein files. You said the list was on your desk. Then a memo came out and said that there was no list. Phase two of the binders never happened. The President of the United States says the Epstein thing is a hoax. He blasts his own base for wanting the release of the files. He blamed Barack Obama. Republicans voted against the release of the files in the Rules Committee. Then they refused to even return to the Rules Committee until they could be protected from future votes on the release. Speaker Johnson sends Congress home a day early before break. They sent the Deputy Attorney General to meet with Maxwell. She says something favorable about the president. Miraculously, she gets transferred to a minimum security facility. No one can explain why. Miraculously, the leaks to the Wall Street Journal stopped. We come back from break. We have the Massie discharge petition. Republicans drop a rule, a non-binding resolution trying to kill the Massie discharge petition. The White House says passing the Massie discharge petition is a hostile act. Trying to stop the necessary 218 signatures, according to Republican members that signed it, the White House brought them into the Situation Room, you know, the place where the president goes for time of war, promising things like appropriations or maybe even to primary them. People in the room say you were there. It didn't work. We get the 218 signatures. We eventually passed the Massie petition. You guys didn't release the files. You were forced by Congress, every member of the House except one, and the entire Senate. The reason the president signed it is because it was a veto-proof majority. We can't agree on anything, and yet the entire House but one member and the whole Senate forced the administration to release the files. Kash Patel under oath said to Senator Kennedy, the FBI is not in possession of any credible evidence that Epstein trafficked girls to anyone but himself.
At the center of the controversy is a document labeled Child Sex Trafficking Co-Conspirators. When the Department of Justice first released it, the names listed were completely redacted. It was only after pressure from Representative Thomas Massie that portions of the document were unredacted. That's when a key detail emerged. The name Les Wexner appeared in the file. According to critics, this wasn't just a passing reference. They argue the document categorized him specifically as a co-conspirator, not merely a witness or bystander. Attorney General Pam Bondi defended the issue, saying the name appears frequently across many files and that this particular redaction was an isolated mistake. But opponents pushed back, arguing that context matters. They say this wasn't just any document, it was the one where the classification itself carried serious implications. And initially, that classification was hidden from public view. Another major concern centers on what are known as FD 302 forms, Official Federal Bureau of Investigation interview records with victims and witnesses. These are critical documents. They contain first-hand accounts and the names of individuals allegedly involved. But according to critics, these records are now being heavily redacted to the point where meaningful oversight becomes nearly impossible. In some cases, attempts to view redacted sections lead to layers of additional redactions. Other files, they claim, have been removed entirely from public access. For those raising concerns, this goes beyond administrative issues. They argue it suggests a pattern, not of being overwhelmed by documents, but of limiting visibility into the most sensitive evidence. The debate continues to intensify. Let's take a look at the clip.
We know now that's not true. According to documents, Epstein had a worldwide sex trafficking ring. Girls from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Russia, Paris, modeling agencies sending him girls. He even had a relationship with a summer camp where he groomed girls at a picnic table. Ghislaine Maxwell says 29 Epstein associates cut secret DOJ deals. Turns out there is a list. 6 names readily available if you unredact them. Co-conspirators named, but we got them when you unredact them. Maxwell recently tells a House Oversight Committee that she wants clemency to release more names. Kash Patel under oath said Trump's name appears less than 100 times in the files. We now know that's not true. Trump's name appears more times in the Epstein files than God's name appears in the book about God. Okay, by the way, this is the Trump Bible. Move over, King James. Trump's name also appears more times in the Epstein file than Harry Potter's name appears in the 7 books about Harry Potter. Lutnick says that in 2008, he went to Epstein's home, says he had a massage table in the living room, that Epstein said he got one every day, that it was the right type of massage. He and his wife decide to leave and say they'll never be in a room with him again. Howard then says, I'm sure the Epstein stuff is all on video. He was the greatest blackmailer of all time. Well, how would Howard know that? But now the files are public, and in 2012, we found out that he and his family are on Epstein Island after Epstein pled guilty to state charges. I'm from Florida. I take my family to Disney World, not to Epstein Island. There are documents in the files that dispute the president's claim that he kicked Epstein out of his club. Allegedly, the president said that he asked Epstein to leave. Supported now, that's disputed though by statements from the manager of the club.
At its core, this controversy is being framed as a question of power, control, and accountability. Critics argue that when institutions release sensitive details about victims while withholding information about alleged co-conspirators, it creates a perception of imbalance, one that can discourage others from coming forward. They warn that transparency must be handled carefully so that it protects victims while also ensuring accountability for those accused of wrongdoing. The Department of Justice maintains that it has produced millions of documents and that the process is complex, involving legal safeguards, privacy protections, and the sheer scale of the material. However, some lawmakers, including Thomas Massie, have argued that the focus should be on a much smaller set of key documents that could provide clearer answers about who was involved and what decisions were made. Attorney General Pam Bondi has defended the department, stating that errors can occur when handling large volumes of data, and emphasizing that corrections, such as the redaction issue involving Les Wexner, were made once identified. She has also pointed out that questions surrounding the handling of the Jeffrey Epstein case span multiple administrations, including those of George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. Critics, however, argue that legal obligations under the Epstein Files Transparency Act require timely and complete disclosure of specific records, including internal decisions about whether to pursue charges in certain cases. They say delays, heavy redactions, or incomplete releases risk undermining the purpose of the law. Supporters of the department counter that these processes must balance transparency with due process, privacy rights, and legal constraints. The debate has also extended to conduct during hearings. Some observers have questioned whether the tone and exchanges met the level of professionalism expected in discussions involving such serious issues. Others argue that the intensity reflects the high stakes involved. What remains clear is that trust is at the center of this issue. Lawmakers, legal experts, and advocacy groups continue to call for greater clarity around how decisions are made and how information is released. At the same time, officials emphasize the need to follow legal procedures and avoid compromising ongoing or sensitive matters. For many observers, this is no longer just about one case. It raises broader questions about how institutions handle transparency, accountability, and justice, especially in complex and sensitive investigations. As the situation continues to develop, attention remains focused on whether further disclosures will provide clearer answers.